Welcome to the Hearing Review's webinar, Being Normal, with Curtis Alcock. I'm Karl Strom, editor of the Hearing Review magazine and its website at hearingreview.com. Today we have some great new ideas brought to you courtesy of CareCredit from Curtis Alcock. Curtis is a hearing aid dispenser at the Broome, Reed & Harris Hearing Clinic in Exeter, England, and founder of the Udira think tank for hearing. And as you're about to see, Curtis has some fairly revolutionary ideas about the language, the imagery, and the marketing that we use when trying to convince someone to positively address their hearing loss. As someone who's been covering the hearing industry for over 20 years, I can honestly say that some of the things that Curtis points out are real forehead slappers. They're things that I've never really thought about before. And the following presentation, as well as Curtis's articles in the Hearing Review and other professional journals, shows that we, as an industry, need to start changing the way we're framing hearing loss, and we need to stop stigmatizing patients before they even walk into the door of the practice. This webinar is brought to you by CareCredit, a healthcare credit card designed for patients' health, beauty, and wellness needs. It helps family access care they need and want without delay or compromise. Approved patients with hearing problems can use it to pay for hearing tests, aids, and other preventive hearing devices they need to live their life to the fullest. CareCredit is also offering at its 2015 AAA booth in San Antonio a summary of Curtis's presentation, along with a special report and toolkit about the hearing industry and hearing care practice metrics. So if you're at AAA, be sure to stop by the CareCredit booth, that's booth 403, and pick these up. As a matter of housekeeping in this webinar, you can email Curtis and me questions via the Q&A box on the left or by using the email shown at the end of this presentation. I'm also obligated to point out the standard ever-present legal disclaimer, which essentially says that you are urged to consult with financial, legal, and other advisors relative to this content, and there's no implied liability for the use of the information provided. And with that, I would like to introduce Curtis Alcock to today's Hearing Review webinar. Curtis?
Well, thank you for that introduction, Karl. Okay, so in this webinar, we're going to be taking a look at this whole idea of being normal and how this affects the way people think and the way people act when it comes to hearing care. And what we're going to see as we dig deeper into this whole idea of what it means to be normal is that how people themselves and how they want to be seen by others can actually explain many of those barriers and many of the negative attitudes we encounter in hearing care today. Because what we'll see by the end of this webinar is that people's desire to be seen as normal is one of the root causes of why people today currently don't want to get their hearing checked and why they currently don't want to use hearing aids. And then once we've done that, we're then going to look at how we can stop triggering such negative reactions in the first place. Are there things that you and I should be doing, or things that we should be saying, or not doing, or not saying, that will actually make it easier for someone out there to have their hearing checked for the first time, or to begin using hearing technology? Because if we're involved in hearing care, this is something that affects us all. But I'm pleased to tell you that I finally have a foolproof solution. Mind reading. We want to know what our patient or our client is really thinking. Just think how much easier our jobs would be. We could make sure that any advice we were giving people, or any product or any service that we were offering, was exactly what they were looking for. Otherwise, there's always going to be this strong possibility that we'll end up giving them something they don't want because we're seeing things from our perspective rather than theirs. Or worse still, we may end up giving them something that we think they need. Now, I have to confess, I have some experience of this. Pretty much every time it's my wife's birthday. Well, Emma, don't you? You see, you don't want to ask her what she wants for her birthday because, well, that's like telling her that you don't pay enough attention to what interests her. But on the other hand, if I don't ask her, I end up getting her something that I only think that she wants. Or worse still, something that I think she needs. And you know, that never seems to go down too well. It's like I'm telling her that she's not good enough as she is, that she needs some improvements, that something about her needs fixing. Now, another situation we come across where mind reading would be really useful is when we're dealing with people we don't know. You see, often people will try to fit in with other people's expectations of them. So they may be giving us all the right signals, they might be saying all the right things, but their intention, in other words, what they're actually going to do, is completely different. Because we never really know what's going on below the surface, do we? Finally, there's this type of situation, where we say something that we think is a perfectly harmless question, or a perfectly harmless comment, but we get this sudden explosion of emotion, this totally unexpected, over-the-top reaction. Now, to our minds, this reaction appears to us to be totally irrational, but sometimes that's only because you and I don't know what's really going on inside a person's thoughts and feelings. You see, the people we meet, they all have histories just like us. They all have experiences that we know nothing about. They have goals and motivations, all those things that make them who they are. And they bring all of those things with them to every situation they encounter, including when you or I meet them. So here we have 3 types of situations would be really, really useful. Firstly, to make sure that we're always giving people what matters most to them, rather than what we think they need. Secondly, making sure that we know what their real intention is. And thirdly, making sure that we don't accidentally trigger any negative reactions. Now, the thing is that we, as hearing care professionals, are always encountering these types of situations, especially during a consultation. We find ourselves trying to give people something that they really don't want, even though we think they need it. Or they give us all the right signals, say all the right things, but what they intend to do is totally different. Yes, of course I'll wear the hearing aids every day. Yes, of course I'll come back after I've had a think about it. And we say things to them that we think are completely harmless, but our words trigger something for them, some memory or emotion or some thought process. Because when we meet someone for the first time, they do not come alone. They bring with them a lifetime's worth of experiences, and more importantly, they bring with them what they've learned as a result of those experiences. So the better we understand where they're coming from, the more likely we are to connect with them. And that can be the difference between someone acting on our advice or resisting it. Now, have you ever been in one of those appointments where someone has been dragged to you by the family? Here we have a situation where the people who care the most for them are essentially trying to fix them. And as we saw before, nobody likes to think they need fixing, especially by the family. So either they're going to resist our advice, or maybe they're going to try and fit in with what they think the family expects of them. They're going to give us all the right signals. They're going to say all the right things. But their underlying motivation just isn't there. And so that's going to bring problems later on. In the worst case scenario, we find ourselves acting as a referee. Each person in the room is there trying to convince you and me to take their side. It's her fault. She mumbles. It's him. He doesn't listen. Tell him he's going deaf. Tell her she needs to face me when she speaks. Tell him he needs hearing aids. He's driving us all mad. Tell her I don't have a problem hearing anyone else. It's a really difficult situation because they're all seeing the same problem but through a different set of eyes. And the hardest thing for us as hearing care professionals is not to get involved, not to take sides, and instead to be able to see that situation from both perspectives and somehow reconcile them so that people's relationships here don't end up suffering over the longer term. And to do that, we need to understand what's happening below the surface. We need our mind-reading skills. You see, whenever we want another or against what they're used to doing, they're going to weigh up this new idea with what they consider to be normal. If it fits in with what they see as normal, it's going to be far easier for them to absorb our advice or our recommendation. But if they see it as running contrary to what they consider normal, they're far more likely to reject it. So as hearing care professionals, we have to understand what it means to be normal. Now, the idea of being normal is all to do with context. Just take a look at these apples here. Which one is normal? It's not a trick question. See, clearly, it's the green one. The red one is the exception to the rule. It stands out as not belonging here. But let's think about this for a moment. Because if we were to take that same red apple and we were to put it into a box full of other red apples, we would see that red apple as normal. So context is everything. Because the idea of being normal is based on the context of the majority. And that might be the majority of people. So if the majority of people we know all have green hair, that would be normal. And if I had green hair or you had green hair, we would be normal. We would belong. Or it might be the majority of our experiences. So if we've never in our lives brushed our hair, that would be normal. So if someone then comes along and offers us a hairbrush, as I frequently do for my son, the idea of him using that hairbrush doesn't belong with his normal. So he's far more likely to reject it, even if everyone else thinks that he needs it. The majority can also apply to beliefs. So if we believe there simply cannot be life on other planets, and a friend tells us they saw a UFO, we're far more likely to reject the idea, because again, it doesn't belong in our normal. We have this inbuilt bias to act in ways that confirm what we already think we know. So we're constantly weighing up the new against the existing to see if it fits in. And we weigh people up in much the same way. We compare them to a majority to see if they fit in with a particular normal. And we don't just do this for other people either. We do it for ourselves too. We check to see whether we belong, whether we fit in. And obviously this is going to affect how we see ourselves and our own place in the world and how we relate to others. Now, to remain part of a particular group, we have to meet the expectations of that group. If I belong to the green-haired group, and I then go and change my hair to red, then I'm no longer meeting the expectations of the group. I no longer belong. When I turn up to meetings and they're all talking about the latest accessories for green hair, I won't be able to join in. I'll have nothing to talk with them about. So when they all go out to the green-haired nightclub, I'm going to have to stay behind. Now, if it's my choice to change the color of my hair, then that's not so bad. It's my choice. I'm going to stick by my decision. But say one day I wake up, I stumble out of bed, I tread on the Lego piece that has been left by my son, I hop on one foot into the bathroom, I switch on the light, and I look in the mirror. And instead of seeing my luscious, lovely green hair, I see this tangled mess of redness staring back at me. That's not my choice. I didn't ask for this red hair, so as far as I'm concerned, I'm still green-haired, or at least that's how I see myself. And it's how I want others to see me. Because I belong to the group with green hair. I've always had green hair. But then later that day, I turn up to the meeting, and of course I'm wearing my baseball cap because I don't want to draw attention to my red hair. But one by one, people begin to notice. They catch sight of a little strand of red hair below the cap, these people who have green hair, and they begin discussing it amongst themselves, and it dawns on them that I'm no longer meeting the expectations of the group. I have to go. I no longer fit in. I belong elsewhere. I am the outsider. Now, how do I feel? Even harder, of course, would be if my green hair gradually turned red. Because at what point do I no longer belong? At what point am I no longer normal as a green-haired person? Is it when I have a slight loss of green? Is it when I'm 50% red? What's the threshold of action for seeing myself differently? Hopefully, you're already beginning to think how this applies to people when their hearing changes, when they go from having what we would often call normal hearing to having a hearing loss. because often the change is gradual. Often it's not a person's choice. So think how the people who come through your doors and through my doors see themselves when they come to us for the first time. Think what they need from us at that stage. So then anyone that isn't normal, and remember here that normal always depends on the context, anyone who isn't normal is different. They are the exception to the rule, the out. And as we all know, we have this inbuilt bias against being the outsider. We are biologically wired to fit in, because we know from nature that the safest option is to fit in with the group that we best identify with. There's safety in numbers. There's safety for us in the herd. If we're different, if we stand out, well, that means we're vulnerable, and we get seen, or we get seen as an outsider. And outsiders are often regarded as threats. Now, this isn't just something that we see in wildlife documentaries. We experience it right the way through our lives, from the playground all the way through to adulthood. Think of all the people you know who are either Democrats or Republicans. Think of how they see the world. Think of how they relate to one another, both within their own group and the people outside of it. And of course, it's not just politics where this happens, is it? We find it in religion, we see it in sport, and the teams that people follow. We see it in musical taste. We see it in fashion and in the brands that we use. As human beings, we are constantly forming groups amongst ourselves, based on what we have in common. Birds of a feather flock together, and people are either part of our group or they're an outsider. Now, how does this relate to hearing care? Well, say we have someone that comes into our practice, someone new. Ask yourself honestly, as a hearing care professional, what are you hoping will be the outcome of their visit to you? Because chances are we'll be looking out for an opportunity to supply and fit them with hearing aids, because that's how most of our profession is currently geared up with its business models. That's how we pay the bills. But let's think what's happening here. Someone comes through our door for the first time, and before we've even got to know that person, we're automatically looking for opportunities to highlight how they are different from normal, because that way our product or our service becomes relevant to them. If we are being brutally honest with ourselves here, the goal within traditional hearing care is to exclude someone from the majority. They no longer have normal hearing, they are hearing impaired, and then we try to get them to accept this, to accept our viewpoint of them. So we carry out the hearing test, and then what do we do next? We point out on the audiogram normal hearing, and we say, this is normal hearing here, between 0 and 20 decibels. And as you can see, your hearing's down here. We are immediately trying to point out that they are not normal. You are the exception, we are telling them. You are the 1 in 10. You are the outsider. 90% of people out there all have better hearing than you. Can you imagine how it must feel to be told that? Maybe not directly, but think how our words as hearing care professionals trigger thoughts and feelings in people. I often wonder whether this is why we get training in counseling, because we then have to undo all this damage we've done to people's self-esteem. But maybe we're being too hard on ourselves here, because it's not just the profession, is it? Remember that to be part of a group, we must meet the expectations of others within our group. And when it comes to hearing, the expectation of the group is what? That we will hear first time accurately. We take it for granted. That's why we get so frustrated and so impatient when the conversation doesn't just flow. So if we don't hear first time accurately, what happens then? Well, there comes a point where the group feels we no longer belong. We no longer have normal hearing. And if we're not normal, we're different. So our group labels us to mark us as different. They say we are going deaf. They say that we need hearing aids, because they see that as the membership card of being deaf. But there's a real problem here, isn't there? because our client or our patient is being asked to adopt a new belief about themselves and to go places where they wouldn't normally go. In other words, to you and me. And to do things that are totally contrary to what they've ever done in the past, such as having their hearing tested for the first time. So if the only time someone ever visits a hearing care professional is when they're deaf or hearing impaired, and if the first time that people are having their hearing checked is when other people, including you and me, are trying to exclude them from being normal, then of course people are not going to want to go to a hearing care place. Because everyone knows that if you walk in there, you're likely to come out with a deaf sentence. So when someone tells us that we're going deaf, or that we're losing our hearing, or that we need hearing aids, or suggest that we need our hearing checked, think of all those thoughts and feelings that get triggered as a result. Now, do you remember that image we saw earlier of the man weighing up the new idea against all those suitcases, against what he considered to be normal? That's what happens if someone tells us that we're going deaf or that we are losing our hearing. We weigh up this new idea against the full weight of our life's worth of experience, because the cost of changing how we see ourselves is so high. So people look at what it means in their experience to have normal hearing, and they ask themselves, can my current situation be explained by my previous experiences? For example, if I'm finding that people are mumbling, is that something I've encountered earlier in life when there were never any questions about my hearing? And the answer is yes, because you and I both know that there are people out there who mumble. People who are tired, for example, mumble. People who are depressed mumble. Teenage daughters at the dinner table mumble, which is something I've recently learned. And then they look at the difficulties they have in holding a conversation in background noise, or in groups when everyone's talking at the same time. And they ask themselves, is this something I've encountered over the course of my life? And again, the answer is clearly yes. Because if too many people are talking at the same time, or if the background noise is too loud, or if the room has an echo to it, it becomes harder to hear the person talking to you. So this too perfectly fits in with our experience of what it means to have normal hearing. So when someone compares their current hearing difficulties to what in their experience is normal, there's no convincing evidence that they are going deaf, at least nothing they have to worry about just now. But just to be certain, they look at the alternative. They compare themselves against what they believe it means to be deaf. And if you ask most people what it means to be deaf, it means that you cannot hear. So they ask themselves, am I aware of any sounds that I cannot hear? Just try it yourself. Are you aware of any sounds at this moment in time that you cannot hear? Because this is where it gets tricky. You will know from your own experience in practice that some of our clients and some of our patients will tell us just how good their hearing is. They will tell you that they can hear traffic from miles away, that they often hear things too loudly, that they don't have a problem hearing speech, and that they've always had good hearing. And we listen to what they're telling us, and then our professional training kicks in, and we stop listening. And instead we begin to interpret what they're telling us. We begin thinking, they can hear traffic, high-frequency hearing loss, sounds often too loud. Oh, so they have recruitment. They've always had good hearing, so it must be a gradual hearing loss then. And bang, we're out of mind-reading mode. We've stopped thinking about what matters to them, and we've started working out how to fix them, how to convince them that their view of the world is wrong. We've started telling them what we think they need. And if they don't listen to our advice, they're in denial. But what's really going on here is often not denial, at least not in this case. It's observation. Because if a sound falls outside of someone's hearing range, that sound doesn't get blurry, it simply ceases to exist. I remember going into a pet shop once when I was younger and picking up one of those silent dog whistles. And I was there blowing it and blowing it. Nothing. Not a sound. The blasted thing didn't work. If I'd bought it, I would have taken it back. But in a totally unrelated event, which to this day I cannot explain, when I then left that same pet shop, there were all these dogs outside, all barking and crowding around the door. It was most weird. So then people ask themselves, are there any sounds that they cannot hear? And the answer for them will be no. I am not aware of any sounds that I cannot hear. Therefore, I must be hearing everything, or at least I'm hearing everything I need to hear. I'm hearing everything that's important. The second question that people use to see if they are different from normal when it comes to hearing is, do they fit in with what they know about deaf and hearing impaired people? And often this will come from stereotypes. And so again, the answer is no, because we generally tend to perceive hearing impaired people as older than us and deafer than us. That's why people will often say to us, I'm not ready, or I'm too young for hearing aids. What they're actually telling us here is they've done the comparison. And instead of trying to correct that belief, or instead of us trying to promise them that we can hide the hearing aid so they don't feel old, we should be saying to them, that's interesting. What makes you say that? Because then we're giving them the opportunity to provide us with valuable insight into their own thoughts and feelings and where their belief actually comes from. Listening. It's the closest thing we have to mind reading. Just be prepared, though, for what they tell you, and make sure that if they say something that you don't agree with, or that you don't, that you don't understand, that you don't get defensive. Because when I started doing this, that's when I began to realize that many of the negative beliefs people have about hearing and hearing technology and hearing care were actually coming from our own messages, from the marketing of the hearing aid industry. But that's a topic for another time. So for the person who's coming in to see us, there's a strong possibility that they do not see themselves as deaf or hearing impaired. They see themselves as normal because they've done the comparisons. But how do we see them through our professional eyes? Because if we are seeing them differently to how they see themselves, there's going to be a clash of viewpoint. And that's when they're more likely to reject what we tell them, because what we tell them won't fit in with their own sense of normal. You see, our professional training often conditions us to lump the people who visit us in with the deaf and hearing impaired. We're taught that they are in denial, that we have to show them the error of their ways, that they must accept their loss, that they must then demonstrate that acceptance by wearing hearing aids. In fact, hearing aids have become the sign to others that you are deaf or hearing impaired. So if someone doesn't actually see themselves that way, why would they wear the sign? Because all of us act in ways that are consistent with how we see ourselves and how we want others to see us. So hiding a hearing aid is not really the answer, is it? Because we're still asking someone to act in a way that is inconsistent with how they see themselves. And trying to convince someone they need to change how they see themselves, that's not the answer either. Because as we saw earlier, people tend to reject new ideas that don't fit their idea of normal. So as hearing care professionals, we need a different approach. The answer is to make the idea of wearing hearing technology consistent with how someone sees themselves and how they want to be seen. And we know that people want to be seen as normal. They want to fit in with the expectations of their group. So we have to see this through the eyes of our patient or our client. We need to put ourselves into their shoes. You know, one of my favorite quotes is from To Kill a Mockingbird, which I read as a teenager, where Atticus Finch says, "You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it." This is what we mean by empathy. It doesn't mean nodding sympathetically and being understanding. It means climbing into someone's skin and walking around in it. It means becoming that person in our own thoughts and our own feelings. we must become our patient or our client and then see things from their point of view. And when we do this, we immediately create rapport, because people instinctively like people who are most like them. And when we have empathy and rapport and liking, that's when we create trust, because people are more likely to trust someone they like and to trust someone who thinks and feels the same way they do. So instead of seeing our patients or our clients as people who need to be persuaded to go against their own nature in order to wear hearing aids, the much better approach is for us to imagine that we are in their shoes, then ask ourselves one simple question. Am I the sort of person who? Am I the sort of person who would wear hearing aids, for example? Am I the sort of person who would be seen walking into a hearing care practice? Am I the sort of person who would have my hearing checked? The answer to each of those questions always needs to make us feel like we're being normal. So the answer needs to be consistent with what is normal for us, based on our own lifetime's worth of experience, and what we see as normal for the majority. So it's up to us as hearing care professionals to make sure that we are always offering services not just for people who see themselves as hearing impaired or deaf, but also for people who see themselves as normal, so that people have a reason to visit us that doesn't make them appear different from everyone else. Now, there are lots of ways we can do this, but the simplest one is also the most powerful one. It's so simple, in fact, that if we wanted to, we could do it as soon as this webinar is over, and it won't cost us a cent. In fact, it's more likely to increase our income because it will give us new opportunities. So what is this change? It's simply this. It's to change the meaning of the hearing test. You see, for years, we've been using the hearing test to find out if someone is losing their hearing or is hearing impaired. We're actually using it to exclude people from being normal. But you know, when I visit my optician, I'm not going there to find out if I've lost my vision or I'm visually impaired. I go there to ensure that I am keeping my vision at its best. Whether naturally or with optical technology, it matters not. The important thing is to see as expected. It's the same when I visit my dentist. I'm not going there to find out if I'm losing my teeth. I'm going there to make sure that my teeth are performing as expected. It's all part of keeping myself healthy. So if we use the hearing check in the same way, and instead of saying things like, come here and find out if you're suffering from a hearing loss by having a hearing test, we start saying things like, always keep your hearing at its best, check it routinely, just as you do with your eyes and teeth, then suddenly the hearing check becomes consistent with what people are already doing. It's normal. So when somebody comes into us for the first time, don't ask them, how long have you been having problems with your hearing? Because that means that you are already prejudging them. Instead, ask them, have you noticed any changes in your hearing? That's a much more neutral question, so it's not going to trigger any unwelcome thoughts or feelings. And the second change we can make, again, and it won't cost us any money to do so, because rather than marketing hearing aids as a product for the elderly, or as a sign that someone is hearing impaired, use it as a way to enable people to continue to be normal, to keep them hearing at their best, because that way we are empowering them to meet the expectations of the group that they best identify with, those with normal hearing. It's not about someone having a hearing loss. Really, it's about reducing their own risk of mishearing and about preventing them from fading away. It's about keeping people at the top of their potential, because all of those things are consistent with how people want to be seen by others. People want to be all that they can be. They want to fit in with the group. They want to hear first time accurately, wherever possible. And finally, think how we can use tools like CareCredit to help people feel normal about visiting our practice, or having their hearing checked, or investing in hearing technology. Because CareCredit is already known for looking after other areas of health, areas that are already considered by society to be normal. Things like vision and dentistry and looking after our pets. All of those things are about peace of mind and taking care of our family's health throughout life. It's normal. So we can use CareCredit with its wider focus on health to piggyback on all those positive associations. Well, the end of this webinar, and we've covered a lot of ground. Now, we're always going to encounter situations where we really wish we could read someone's mind, but the better we know someone, and the better we understand that people prefer to act in ways that are consistent with how they see themselves and how they want to be seen by others, and the better we understand the idea of what it means for someone to be normal, the easier we'll find our appointments. Continue to put ourselves in the shoes of our clients or our patients. Let's always see things from their point of view rather than ours. And let's give them reasons for visiting us and for having their hearing checked and for using hearing technology that does not make them feel as though they are being different, that does not make them feel like the outsider, but instead that keeping their hearing at its best throughout life is just being normal. Well, if you'd like to contact me or find out more about how we can work together to change society's attitudes towards hearing care, you can visit the Audera website, which is at www.audera.info, or email me. Well, thank you very much for your attention, and now it's back over to Karl.
Thank you, Curtis. That's wonderful information. If you have questions for Curtis, you can email him at the email address shown here. We'll also be holding a live Q&A session for CareCredit customers in the near future, so stay tuned for that. As I mentioned before, CareCredit is also offering a free toolkit as well as a summary of information contained in this webinar at its booth, number 403, at the 2015 AAA Convention in San Antonio. So please stop by and pick up this material if you're attending the convention. I'd like to thank Curtis Alcock and CareCredit for their participation in this webinar, and also HR staff members Dana McLean, Courtney Riley, and Ashley Lawson for helping in producing it. For the Hearing Review, I'm Karl Strom. Thanks for watching.